The cold splash of water hit Sylvester Stallone squarely on the head, soaking his worn black t-shirt and old Arizona Cardinals cap in one humiliating instant. Water streamed down his face, clinging to the creases earned from decades of battles, both real and cinematic. It pooled around the toes of his battered sneakers, darkening the dusty training ground beneath him. For a second, the entire courtyard of Ironwood Security Academy froze, stunned into absolute silence. Moments ago, the new recruits were laughing, flexing, shouting over each other, feeding off the bravado, encouraged by their top instructor, Rick Tanner. Now they stood motionless, their grins stiffening, their cell phones lowering halfway through, recording what they had expected to be another act of hazing, another lesson in toughness, delivered at a vulnerable man's expense. Only this time, the man they soaked and mocked was not just another trainee. He was Sylvester Stallone. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable confrontation and the jaw-dropping aftermath, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. What would you have done if you realized you just humiliated one of America's living legends? We're excited to hear your thoughts. Now let's rewind a bit and uncover how we got here. It had started that afternoon, under the blistering Arizona sun. Ironwood Academy, located just on the outskirts of Scottsdale, was famed across the country for training elite private security professionals, bodyguards for the rich and powerful. The grounds sprawled across 10 acres of sun-bleached desert, dotted with obstacle courses, weight pits, and shooting ranges. On the surface, Ironwood projected discipline, excellence, and professionalism. Behind the scenes, it had rotted into a boys' club of unchecked egos, favoritism, and casual cruelty, especially toward recruits who didn't look the part. Stallone had heard whispers, some from former students he trusted, others from quiet conversations over dinners with friends in Hollywood. He wasn't a man to act on rumors, but his gut told him something was off. And Stallone had learned long ago that a gut feeling was never to be ignored. Ironwood wasn't just another academy. Unknown to most, he had poured significant private investment into it years ago, believing in its original mission: to forge protectors, not bullies. Watching it devolve into a playground for punks was not something he could tolerate. He needed to see it for himself. No press, no entourage, no cameras. Just Sylvester Stallone, stripped down to an alias, Mike Carter, and a duffel bag filled with second-hand gym clothes. When he walked into the reception hall earlier that day, nobody gave him a second glance. His shoulders were still broad, but age had added a slight heaviness to his walk. His face was tanned and weathered, hidden mostly by the low-brimmed Cardinals cap. The young woman at the front desk barely looked up when she handed him a clipboard and told him to report to room B4 for orientation. Meanwhile, leaning against a pull-up rig in the training yard, Rick Tanner spotted Stallone immediately. Tanner was in his prime, tall, muscled, exuding a cocky charm that many mistook for leadership. Tanner thrived on power plays. Picking on recruits was his favorite game, especially ones who, in his eyes, didn't belong. He watched Stallone shuffle across the yard with a sly grin curling at his lips. "Looks like Grandpa wants to be a hero," Tanner muttered loudly enough for several trainees to hear. Laughter, tentative but growing, rippled through the group. Tanner loved an audience, and today he'd found his target. Inside room B4, Tanner wasted no time asserting dominance. He barked orders, cracked jokes about senior discounts and early bedtimes, all aimed squarely at Stallone. To the recruits' credit, a few shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. Ironwood had long taught them that to survive, you laughed along, or you became the next target. When the fitness assessments began, Tanner made a show of calling Mike Carter up first. "Let's see what Grandpa's got left in the tank," Tanner roared, slapping Stallone mockingly on the back. Stallone said nothing. He simply moved through the drills, burpees, weighted carries, wall climbs, slower than the 20-year-olds maybe, but with a steady, relentless rhythm that spoke of deeper reserves. Sweat poured off him under the desert sun, but his breathing remained calm. No theatrics, no complaints. Tanner was not amused. He escalated. He ordered Stallone to drag the heaviest sled across the field, taunted him with jabs about arthritis, shouted exaggerated encouragements, as if speaking to a child. Still, Stallone pushed forward, muscles burning, jaw clenched but silent. If Tanner had been looking closely, he might have seen it, the steel behind the calm, the coiled strength honed from a lifetime of overcoming. But Tanner wasn't looking. He was too busy performing for the others. By late afternoon, when the group was winding down for water breaks, Tanner decided it was time for the final lesson. He sauntered over to the side of the yard where a large orange water cooler sat. With a wicked grin, he filled a cup, walked behind Stallone, and without warning, upended it over his head. The cold water hit like a slap. Stallone stiffened but didn't move. Around him, the recruits' laughter died abruptly. Cameras that had been raised for laughs now froze mid-air. For the first time that day, real unease spread across the yard. Tanner, sensing the shift but too arrogant to stop, grinned and shouted, "Whoops! Hope you didn't melt, old man." Stallone slowly reached up and peeled the cardinal's cap from his head. His soaked hair clung to his forehead. His sharp, unmistakable features, etched deeper by the years, glinted under the harsh Arizona sun. Gasps rippled through the group. Whispers hissed through the yard. "Holy crap! That's Sylvester Stallone." Tanner's grin collapsed into a stunned, sickly half-smile. His swagger drained from him like the water pooling at Stallone's feet. Stallone turned, water dripping from his arms, his voice low and unshakable. "You wanted to teach me a lesson," he said, locking eyes with Tanner, his tone slicing through the heavy air like a blade. "Now it's time for your lesson." In that moment, the entire atmosphere at Ironwood shifted. No more laughter, no more mockery, only the deafening weight of realization sinking into every heart present. Stallone stood there, soaked but unbroken, embodying the very essence of resilience and dignity that Tanner would never understand, but was about to learn firsthand. Rick Tanner stumbled back a half step as Sylvester Stallone's quiet words echoed through the yard. The recruits, sensing that something monumental was unfolding before them, stood frozen, their water bottles half lifted, their conversations cut short mid-whisper. A heavy silence blanketed Ironwood, thicker than the desert heat. Tanner's jaw worked uselessly for a moment, as if searching for a clever retort that wouldn't come. His usual cocky veneer cracked visibly under the pressure of Stallone's unflinching stare. Stallone didn't shout, didn't make a spectacle. He didn't need to. His calm, grounded presence filled the yard more completely than any angry outburst could have. He took one step forward, his soaked sneakers squelching faintly against the dry, cracked ground. The younger man instinctively took a step back. "You think toughness," Stallone said, his voice even but resonant, is about who can yell the loudest, who can humiliate the weakest, who can make someone else feel small just to look bigger. That's not toughness. That's cowardice. His eyes didn't waver. They locked on to Tanner's, exposing him, stripping away the bluster and arrogance until only raw, naked fear remained. Around them, the trainees shifted awkwardly, glancing at each other, realizing that the very culture they had accepted without question was now being held up to the harshest possible light. Tanner swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know," he began, but Stallone cut him off with a slight raise of his hand. "It doesn't matter if you knew who I was," he said. "You didn't respect the man standing in front of you. You didn't respect the uniform you're supposed to be earning. You didn't respect yourself." The words fell heavy, each one hammering down with the finality of a gavel. Stallone turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, to the assembled recruits. "This place was built to train protectors," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the yard. "Men and women who would stand between danger and the people who couldn't stand for themselves, who would embody strength with humility, courage with compassion. Somewhere along the way, that mission got twisted, turned into a game of dominance and mockery. That ends today." Tanner, pale and sweating now despite the cooling evening air, tried to speak again but faltered under the collective weight of 100 silent eyes staring at him. Stallone turned back to him. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "Effective immediately. You're suspended. You'll report to the disciplinary board first thing tomorrow morning. They'll decide if you have a future here, and believe me, they'll be reviewing today very, very carefully." Tanner's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. Stallone didn't wait for a response. He shifted his focus back to the recruits. "As for the rest of you," he said, "consider this your first and most important lesson. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit or how much you can lift. It's about character. It's about how you carry yourself when no one's watching, how you treat the person you think can't fight back." His voice softened slightly, but the gravity of his message remained unyielding. And if you can't learn that, you have no business being here. The recruits stood rooted, absorbing the words with a solemnity that had been absent all day. Some looked ashamed. Some looked inspired. A few looked like they were seeing the academy, and themselves, for the very first time. Stallone nodded once, firmly, then turned and walked across the yard toward the main building, water still dripping from his clothes, but leaving a trail of something stronger in his wake. Respect. Inside the administration wing, Stallone met with the academy's director, a wiry man named Charles Harlan, who looked as though he hadn't broken a sweat since the Reagan administration. Harlan had seen the entire scene unfold on the security monitors. His face, normally smug and aloof, was now a study in barely concealed panic. "Mr. Stallone," he said, voice cracking slightly, I'm so sorry. If I had known—" Stallone held up a hand. "Save it," he said bluntly. "I didn't come here to hear apologies. I came here because I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes." Harlan blanched. "And I saw it," Stallone continued. "Rotten from the inside. Arrogance, disrespect, everything this academy was never supposed to become." "We can fix it," Harlan said quickly, the sweat starting to bead at his temples. "We can implement new training standards, review our instructors." Stallone leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "You'll do more than that, Charles. You're going to clean house. Starting tonight, every instructor, every staff member who thinks humiliating people is training, gone. Immediate review of training protocols, mandatory ethics, and respect workshops. And I want a full audit of all complaints filed by trainees in the last 5 years. Harlan nodded frantically, his hand scribbling notes, even as his eyes darted nervously to Stallone's face. "And Charles," Stallone added, straightening, his shadow stretching long across the room in the setting sun. "If I don't see real change in 60 days, I pull my funding. And I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why Ironwood fell." The director paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Stallone didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out, the weight of his presence leaving an indelible mark on the sterile office. Outside, the recruits were still gathered in uneasy clusters, whispering, stealing glances towards the building. As Stallone emerged, the whispers faded. Silence fell again. Then, slowly, hesitantly, one of the younger trainees stepped forward. He looked barely 20, wiry, nervous, but there was something genuine in the way he stood, the way he squared his shoulders, even as his hands trembled slightly. "Sir," the young man said, voice cracking slightly with emotion, "thank you." Stallone nodded once, acknowledging the boy's courage. Another recruit stepped forward, then another and another, until a small knot of trainees stood facing him, awkward but earnest, their eyes shining with something that had been missing all day: hope. Stallone let the moment hang there, solid and real, before finally speaking again. "This place can be great," he said quietly, "but it starts with you, every single one of you. You have a choice. Be a protector or be a bully. Only one of those is worth being proud of." Without waiting for applause, without striking a heroic pose, Stallone turned once more toward the parking lot. The setting sun lit the landscape in gold and fire as he walked away, his silhouette shrinking against the horizon, but his lesson burning brightly in every heart left behind. The next morning at Ironwood Academy was unlike any other in its history. A cool desert breeze cut across the training fields as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows over the equipment, still glistening with dew. But there was no shouting, no bravado filling the yard. Instead, the recruits moved quietly, respectfully, organizing themselves into neat rows without being told. Word had spread overnight like wildfire. Not just about the revelation of Sylvester Stallone's presence, but about the meaning behind it. The warning embedded in every step he had taken across the field. In the administrative wing, chaos unfolded behind closed doors. Charles Harlan, visibly rattled, had spent the night drafting new policies, compiling lists of instructors whose behavior no longer met the new standard. By 8 a.m., 3 senior trainers had been dismissed, with more scheduled for review. Mandatory training in ethics and leadership values was already being arranged. Ironwood's dusty pride was being torn down, brick by brick, and for the first time in years, something new and better could begin to take root. Tanner, meanwhile, sat slumped in the small office adjacent to the director's wing, waiting for the disciplinary board. His once cocky posture had withered into something smaller, more fragile. The reality of what had happened and who he had humiliated had finally sunk in completely. No amount of apologies or explanations could erase the stain he had left on himself and on the Academy's name. For all his outward strength, Tanner now knew he had failed the most basic test of all, the test of character. By mid-morning, the entire academy had been summoned to the main hall, a vast gymnasium-like space usually reserved for award ceremonies and graduation events. Rows of metal folding chairs filled the room, and the recruits filed in solemnly, sensing that what they were about to witness would not be just another lecture. Stallone entered through a side door, not with fanfare or bodyguards, but alone, dressed in simple dark jeans and a plain gray shirt. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. Every head in the room turned to him as he strode quietly to the podium at the front, a man who needed no introduction. He stood there for a long moment, scanning the crowd, letting the silence deepen until it was heavy enough to anchor everyone in their seats. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, but every word carried weight. "When I was a young man," Stallone began, "I thought strength was about how much you could lift, how many fights you could win, how tough you looked when you walked into a room. I learned the hard way that real strength, the kind that matters, comes from how you carry yourself when nobody's watching. It's about how you treat the people around you, especially the ones who can't do anything for you, especially when you think no one important is paying attention." The recruits listened intently, many leaning forward without realizing it, drawn in not just by the name, but by the truth they heard in every syllable. Stallone continued, his eyes steady. "Yesterday, I saw a snapshot of this academy's soul. Some of it was ugly. Some of it showed me there's a lot of work to do. But some of it showed me hope. I saw young people who still have the chance to be better than the world expects of them. To be better than the easy path of cruelty and arrogance." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting each person in the room feel personally called upon. "You don't become great by pushing others down," he said. "You become great by lifting others up, by standing for something when it's easier to stay silent, by choosing respect, not because you have to, but because it's right." His gaze swept the room again, softening slightly as it landed on the younger trainees, the ones who had hesitated yesterday, unsure whether to join in Tanner's ridicule or to walk away. "Every one of you has that choice," he said, "every day, every moment, not just here, but when you go out into the world. When you're guarding a family, escorting someone who trusts you with their life, standing between danger and the innocent. You won't always have someone watching to make you behave. You have to be the kind of person you'd trust with your own family, your own life. That's what Ironwood is supposed to mean. That's what you're supposed to become." He leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice dropping even lower, so the recruits had to strain forward to catch every word. "And if you're not ready to commit to that, if you think this is still about playing king of the hill or flexing for attention, do yourself a favor. Leave. Today. Because the academy we're building from here on out will not have room for cowards hiding behind muscles. It will be built on courage. Real courage." Stallone stepped back from the podium then, not waiting for applause, not expecting it. But after a few heartbeats of stunned silence, the room erupted, not in wild cheering or whooping, but in a slow, deliberate standing ovation, as meaningful as any award ceremony he had ever attended. One by one, the recruits rose, clapping, some with tears welling in their eyes, some with renewed pride, some realizing for the first time what it really meant to wear the Ironwood crest. Tanner, sitting alone at the back of the room, lowered his head, the sound of that applause hammering into him with merciless clarity. He knew he didn't deserve to stand among them. Not yet, maybe not ever. But deep inside, for the first time, he felt the sting of true regret. Not the kind fueled by fear of punishment, but the kind born from understanding how badly he had fallen short of something greater than himself. As the hall slowly emptied, small groups of recruits gathered outside in the sunshine, their voices low but earnest, talking not about weightlifting or drills, but about Stallone's message, about what it really meant to protect, to serve, to lead. Changes swept through Ironwood rapidly in the weeks that followed. Ethics courses became part of the core curriculum. Senior staff were retrained or replaced. A new honor code was introduced, one that emphasized not just physical excellence, but moral responsibility. Stallone didn't return for every meeting or inspection. He didn't need to. His presence was woven into the Academy's walls now, into the very fabric of what it meant to walk through its gates. And for the recruits who remained, those who had chosen to stay and rise to the challenge, the transformation was profound. Ironwood became harder, yes, but better, stronger in ways that truly mattered. In the rare quiet moments when Stallone thought back to that blistering day under the Arizona sun, he didn't remember the water dripping from his face or the sting of public humiliation. He remembered the moment the culture shifted, the moment hope cracked through hardened hearts, the moment real strength, the kind he had spent a lifetime chasing and finally found, planted itself deep into the desert soil and started to grow. And that, more than any victory on screen or ovation on stage, was the kind of legacy worth leaving behind.